Hello and welcome to this guide for 10 more tips and tricks for Manor Lords success. If you haven't seen the first one, definitely go check it out. I'll link it in the video description. There's definitely plenty more for us to learn, so let's dive right into our first one. So I would suggest having at least 12 months worth of food and firewood as a minimum. You can see here I have quite a bit more than that. If you have the storage to maintain more than 12 months, definitely do that. It allows you to pivot a lot more as the seasons change, gives you a bit more flexibility with farming if you want to focus a bit more on flax or barley, and just generally keeps you in a nice little safe zone. So 12-month minimum is definitely my recommendation. And another thing to keep in mind is the changing of seasons and adjusting to the seasonal shifts accordingly. So every season, especially for farming, if you have crop rotations on, this is going to change over into the second year every October. So there we are. We've fast forwarded until October and our crops have adjusted accordingly. You will also have your royal tax increase in October as well, so do keep that in mind. Another thing to keep in mind for seasons is that in winter, your firewood usage will be doubled. I do believe that's taken into account up here when it takes into account your supply surplus. So just keep an eye on that. If you don't have enough firewood or charcoal, definitely stock up well before winter so that you have enough and it's distributed across your burgages. Another thing to keep in mind for seasonal changes are berries. So around the start of March, berries will start growing again. It's important to get as many families as you can to start harvesting these. You can really maximize your berries by getting on this early. You don't want this at maximum capacity while it's still growing. And in winter, this berry deposit will start shrinking. So you have a limited time to continue collecting berries. And then once it's gone, it won't come back until the next season. And as I mentioned with the changing of the seasons, another really good tip is to use crop rotation and use that crop rotation to fallow your field. So what this does is just regenerates all types of fertility. You won't be growing anything in that field for that season. So generally it's best just to have a lot of different fields and then just rotate which one per season that you're going to fallow. If the fertility is too low, then you can obviously fallow it for a little bit longer. But generally I found that one season is enough. And let's continue the theme of farming with checking for fertility before we place down fields. So there are 4 different types of fertility that we want to look at. So we have emmer, which is wheat, we have flax, and we have barley and rye. So keep in mind that rye can only be unlocked through development point, but the other 3 you can do immediately. So if we want to build another field and we're looking at flax or barley, we do have some space over here where we could make a flax field. So if we just make one as an example here, we'll just make a small little plot. And that has up to 90%. So if we go somewhere else where actually it's not too great and we make a field there, so let's just go down here. We're looking at 58%. So really keep that in mind when you're placing your fields and just when you're planning where you're going to have your farming region. It doesn't have to be up to 100% or 90%. Just get it as high as possible and keep this in mind when you're rotating fields around as well. Another great tip is to make use of bakeries. So if you have spent your development points into heavy plow and then into bakeries, you can create artisans who will work in a bakery extension. And the best part about this is they will produce bread from flour with twice the efficiency of the communal oven. So I have been producing a lot of wheat in this region. And as you can see, I have a huge amount of bread compared to other food types. I found this really useful as unexpectedly a lot of food that it produces. So I highly recommend getting this one, especially if you're going into heavy plow anyway. It's definitely worth the additional development point. And speaking of using the heavy plow development point, one thing to keep in mind is using ox and assigning those to your farmhouses. So if we just zoom out here, we can go over to one of our farmhouse. And if you go to the advanced tab, here you can assign ox to this farmhouse and they will help plow your fields. These are super useful. They're extremely more efficient than just having your families do all the plowing. So I highly recommend getting those. It's almost a no-brainer, especially if you want to go for bakeries as well. And don't forget to also unassign these when you are not using them so that they can be used for other things. So the next thing to keep in mind are tithes and taxes. So if we head on over to our manor and we go to the taxes tab, there are a bunch of things in here. Only 2 of these are currently active in the game at the moment, land tax and tithe. So land tax generally at 10%, I have found is if you have that in most of your regions, it's generally enough to keep up and have a little bit extra for the king's tax. And that just gives you a little bit of extra money for your treasury. Do keep in mind that the higher your taxes, the more approval you will lose. So if we put this up to 30%, we're going to lose a significant amount of approval. So I tend to just keep it around 10 to 15%. And the tithe gives additional food to the church in return for influence. So if you need to get additional influence to claim new territories, tithe is one way that you can do that. And a great tip if you're looking to make quite a bit of money in the early game is building a trading post and selling a few items. So I have found that shoes and war bows tend to be the best for me. Shoes can be exported for 8 each, which I think is really, really good. You could obviously export the leather as well, which is only 6, so you don't have that additional step. But I do think it is really worth it. If you've got a rich wild animal deposit, you can definitely work that extra and use that leather and those hides to make shoes and then have a really, really nice income. And additionally for warbows, if you're getting a lot of wood and planks, you can use that surplus to make those. So to make those warbows, you just need a burgage plot at level 2 or higher, and you can make a Fletcher's workshop there. And the final thing is a simple one, but just try to get into the habit of pausing and thinking ahead, just thinking what needs to be done. Do you have unassigned families that could be used somewhere else? Do you need to unassign oxen from somewhere? How is your trade going? Are you making enough profit? Do you have enough firewood and food? And all of these things you can do while pause, so you're not losing any time figuring these things out while the timer is still going. And that's it for this Manor Lords video of 10 extra tips and tricks for success. I hope it was useful. Do go and watch the other video if you haven't already, so you have everything covered. Lots more videos like this to come, so see you in the next one.